Hey everyone, let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a look at a genuinely fascinating and honestly kind of mind-boggling constitutional court case out of South Africa. It's Louis Benjamin van der Westhuizen versus the state. Now, normally when we dig into constitutional court judgments, we're looking at these massive, landscape-shifting interpretations of human rights or super complex constitutional law. But today we're looking at a literal masterclass in how absolutely not to approach the highest court in the land. This case is just a brilliant, if somewhat unfortunate, example of an absolute procedural disaster. Right out of the gate, the sheer absurdity of it all hits you. Just picture this. You're submitting legal paperwork to get out of prison. You want the ultimate judges to grant you bail. But you completely forget to tell the court what crime you actually committed, or how long your sentence is, or even when you were convicted. Seriously, it's like walking into an emergency room, demanding surgery, and then completely refusing to tell the doctor where it hurts. So, how does a legal submission get this completely derailed right from step one? Well, let's take a look at the actual application itself. And the really wild part here is that this wasn't just some layperson scribbling notes on a napkin. The applicant actually had a professional attorney representing him. Yet even with professional legal counsel, they somehow managed to leave the absolute most foundational facts out of the paperwork. No specific offense listed, no sentence imposed, no date of conviction, and no date of sentencing. I mean, this is literally the bare minimum information a judge would need to even start to understand a case, let alone make a ruling on something as serious as bail. You might be wondering, how did he even end up here? Let's track the rather desperate procedural journey this applicant went on before finally arriving at the Constitutional Court's doorstep. Because he didn't just parachute straight into the highest court. No, the whole chain of events kicked off with a conviction in the regional court over in George. From there, he moved things to the High Court in Cape Town, and when that didn't work out, he escalated his fight up to the Supreme Court of Appeal, or the SCA. And finally, after striking out there too, he tried to bring his case before the Constitutional Court. So we're talking about a long, pretty arduous journey up through the entire hierarchy of the judicial system. But what was the actual goal on this whole journey? Well, along the way, he tried, and failed, to get the High Court to completely reopen his case. And his reasoning was super specific. He basically wanted the court to consider facts and circumstances that happened after his sentence was imposed. So he essentially wanted a do-over based on things that went down after he was already convicted and sentenced. The High Court looked at that request and, unsurprisingly, just dismissed it entirely. Which brings us to the strict legal mechanics required to bypass standard appeals. Because after the Supreme Court of Appeal said no, van der Westhuizen tried a very specific, very bold legal maneuver. That maneuver is something known as direct access. The applicant's submission was essentially an application for direct access to the Constitutional Court specifically to be granted bail. Now, direct access? That is a highly unusual path. It's an extraordinary procedure really only meant for exceptional cases where it is overwhelmingly in the interest of justice for the highest court to jump in immediately, completely skipping the usual slow march through the appellate system. You need special permission, what's called leave of the court, just to bring the application in the first place. And to actually get that special permission, you have to clear 4 incredibly strict hurdles under what's called Rule 17(2). Think of these as heavily locked doors protecting the highest court's time. First, you have to set out grounds proving it's in the interests of justice. Second, you gotta clearly state the relief you want and why you deserve it. Third, you have to tell the court if oral evidence is needed, which, by the way, appellate courts almost never do. And fourth, if it is needed, you have to explain exactly how to resolve any conflicting facts. These aren't just polite suggestions, okay? They are rigid procedural rules designed to keep things fair and efficient. So you can imagine how the judges felt when they saw this application. The judgment actually delivers a pretty scathing rebuke stating, the applicant, though represented by an attorney, has paid no regard to the rules of this court. They noted that literally 0 of those Rule 17 provisions were observed, not a single one. And to make it even worse, the applicant actually stated in his own application that he was seeking legal advice and was uncertain as to what remedy he even had. As the court very bluntly pointed out, well, he might not have one at all. So what exactly was his excuse for failing at that previous hurdle, the Supreme Court's appeal? Let's take a look at his main argument and see exactly how the Constitutional Court completely dismantled it. The applicant's big argument was that the SCA dismissed his application for leave to appeal way too prematurely. He basically claimed they threw it out without even looking at statements he made in a replying affidavit, which he argued was filed on time, just after the SCA's initial order was made.
He really thought this late piece of paperwork was going to save him, but the reality? The Constitutional Court found that the SCA judges did in fact reconsider the matter after that replying affidavit came in, and after they read it, they concluded there was absolutely no reason to recall their order. So his entire core argument just vanished.
Ultimately, when the Constitutional Court stepped back and reviewed the whole situation, they saw absolutely zero evidence that the lower courts had made any kind of mistake. There was simply nothing put in front of them to suggest the SCA's decision to refuse leave to appeal was wrong in substance. Plus, there was practically zero chance of persuading any court that his original sentence back in George should be changed just because of things that happened after he was locked up.
So when you add it all up, missing the most foundational facts, completely ignoring procedural rules, and bringing a totally debunked legal argument to the table, well, the final verdict becomes pretty inevitable.
The court decisively wrapped things up with this statement. The applicant has therefore failed to establish that it is in the interests of justice to grant him direct access to this court for the purpose of granting him bail. Because remember, direct access is strictly reserved for exceptional circumstances where true justice demands it. Bringing a sloppy, incomplete, rule-breaking application, that is pretty much the exact opposite of that standard. And so, the final ruling comes down. Without sticking to the strict procedural requirements of Rule 17, and without providing even the most basic facts about his own conviction, the whole request was just shut down. The application for direct access was completely refused, and based on what little he actually submitted, the court made it clear there was zero reason why they, or frankly any other court, should grant him bail.
Which leaves us with a pretty interesting thought to ponder. You know, we always hear that phrase, justice is blind, meaning it's supposed to be perfectly impartial. But this case is such a perfect reminder that while justice might be blind, the legal system absolutely requires its paperwork. Procedural law isn't just a bunch of annoying red tape. It's the very framework that allows courts to actually function, to understand a dispute, and to deliver a fair outcome. When you completely ignore that framework, even if you've got a lawyer sitting right next to you, the doors to justice are going to stay firmly locked. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always double-check your paperwork.